Hello, everyone. First, a couple of very short disclaimers. One, this talk is definitely going to be under the amount of time, so you're going to have plenty of time to go and hang out and enjoy the sun. Secondly, this was also only being given because Kat told me that we had to submit a talk. This was intended to encourage the rest of you to submit talks by having something so bad that you felt guilty. That did not work. So instead we're going to be talking about handling design critique. But I think this is probably also true of how to handle awful people doing terrible reviews of your code as well. Design critique is unique in that it is almost always given by non-experts to experts. But a lot of the time it can be, in this particular case here, so this is a typical example of life as a working designer, which you can see on the screen here, where you are trying to fix something and several well-meaning people come in and offer conflicting guidance on what to do. And that I would say is probably the most normal thing, right? People saying, make it more purple, 2 minutes later, less purple.
Or at the same time.
Or at the same time, hearing two entirely opposite things. So, Jakub, as someone who makes a lot of icons that people critique all the time.
Yeah. Well, just recently, I managed to leak like an intermediate step of an icon or a redesign that we're thinking of. So there's something that we're trying to go in different directions, and Lapo tells me not to show anything before we actually are certain ourselves which direction to go, and then this thing leads. And then I just go and look at all the comments, and most of them are not very positive, let's say.
So when you say tip one on how to handle design feedback is to look at the comments? Because normally people tell you not to look at the comments, right?
Yeah, but I mean, usually, you have to be able to do anything, you have to assemble a group of people that you respect and are able to work ideas off initially before you go out in the open. Yeah. You don't want to just be alone and then just look what I did. Everybody tell me your opinion, because it's going to be disastrous. I think for your motivation to do anything like that in the future.
That's a really, really solid point. I think mutual trust is really important, and you see this just as much. It's very important in any kind of software team, particularly designers hate showing stuff before they think they like it.
Yeah.
You spend a lot of time hating everything you're working on right until it's good, which can be never. But it's really important to make good software to actually show this early to people and to get their feedback. So you have to operate in an area of shared vulnerability. And that also means, on the other side, that developers doing stuff have to show you stuff when it's terrible too, right? When it's half implemented, when it's not good. You have to have that kind of open and trusting environment.
And people will tell you that, if you work in the open, you have to be open with everything. And you're like, the weaknesses of particular designs yourself. Yeah. You don't really need to amplify it by, a group of people really hating on that particular things.
So when you looked at this massive long comments thread,
and that was like, oh, it's blue again. Selection color is blue, and it's like, oh, it's too white. You can't see. All of those things you already know, that there's too much contrast. But the thing is, even a negative thing can actually be a good thing to take, because you were worrying about having enough contrast for the icon to be visible on multiple backgrounds. And if people hate on it for it being too contrasty, then, hey, the piece of information in there is it has enough contrast. So that's actually a good information that you can take wrapped in how do you say?
Wrapped inside the brick that is thrown at you contains a message wrapped around it. So long as you're able to dodge the brick, or at least hopefully it doesn't hurt so much, you can extract that message. But that can be very that's the kind of thing that as a junior or a young designer can be very tough to accept and respect. And normally when seeing a feedback thread like that, I would have just cried, gone to the pub, taken the rest of the day off. And that kind of thing can be really tough, particularly if we're trying to integrate newer people into the community who aren't necessarily used to having their early work shouted at by random people on the internet. Yeah. I remember actually seeing those icons. I was talking to Jonathan about them yesterday.
And the thing is, like,
he was like, "What are these?" I've never seen this before. This looks a bit weird.
Well, because I'm kind of torn on the issue. Because, like, on one hand, it like if you only create this tight group of people that you trust, and it's possible to throw ideas around, you're kind of closing the inroad for newcomers to feel being part of the design process. So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
It doesn't help people feel like they own the product.
But I just said, newcomers, it does hurt me as well. Like if the thing that people are critiquing is really early, and you're just trying to figure out a style, and it's terrible, and then people are just like, it got me mad because there was another leak a while ago. And well, it wasn't a leak because it was really just like out in the open, and just somebody picked up on it. And
have you read Paul Graham's story about why the Segway failed? It's a pretty great essay. It's short, but just basically, the Segway was supposed to, that all this hype leading up to it. I don't know if it's old enough to remember this, but like he was going to transform cities, and they had celebrities talking about this hit that was going to happen, right? And then it came out, and it turned out he looked like an asshole writing on it, and it's because they just talked to their designers among themselves, and they didn't actually put it out in the public, and nobody realized you looked like an asshole riding a Segway around, right? So sometimes that public feedback is really important for success. So how do you get that? It's a bad example because I use swearing in it, but how do you get that? How do you get that feedback outside of your trusted circle without having a negative?
Good question. I'm going to say the answer to the. So not saying the question again, so for the people who doubtless enjoying themselves watching this video. So you were talking, Mike, about basically how to avoid groupthink, and particularly the case where you've created something that looks ridiculous, how do you bring light into
something that you feel really good about in your own group, but it turns out.
And to a certain extent, creating that groupthink and that kind of team mentality is actually something you really want, particularly if you're trying to, from a design perspective, trying to enforce consistency, right? You want people to really assimilate the kind of the tenets of the design style, and to make icons that all kind of look the same and to feel the same and do all of that. So you want the strengths of the group without any of the weaknesses. And that's kind of hard. One of the ways you can do this is by testing it with random humans. You can test stuff in a structured fashion. So I think one of the things that we're talking about here is accepting structured critique, right, rather than necessarily unstructured. And I think that's just as true for sort of random merge requests as it is for anything else. When someone's going through stuff, so you know that you need gates, or when you're developing something where you do open it up a little bit more. But I don't have a great answer on this at the moment. As someone who has really, really, really got into the idea of some truly terrifyingly bad animations in the past and forced them out into the world and said, no, this is the correct answer. People will definitely love this. And trampled over all kinds of reasonable objections. Sometimes you're just wrong. and that can be a bit embarrassing. Sleeping. Power efficiency. Yeah, it does look like. Okay. Anyway, do you have any better ideas on this? I mean, this is something we're not very good at as a community, I'd say, right? It's so yeah, patch as well.
Perhaps that happens because people treat. I don't know. I see. Perhaps people treat designing icons, which is visual design, graphics design, as a subjective matter. When it might be a little bit, but I wouldn't say that it's strictly subjective, and I don't like Zavelli critique it for this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So when I review code, code is by its nature is a structured thing.
Yeah.
So you can't write code out of order.
I think one of the important points around interactive design, which people when they see stuff don't fully appreciate, is that all of these things live in a system. Right? So intention with other icons, like an icon, although it looks amazing on your webpage, when there is just like this massive photos icon, like it's all it is. You just bow down and worship the icon. The icon is never on its own, right? It's like you see a grid of icons, you see a dock of icons, you see the icon in the top left-hand corner of a window maybe, and then like a load of gradation and like you're trying to draw the eye to various different places, right? It exists in tension with other things and it has to live in all of these different environments. So you're always balancing and trading off things that those who don't necessarily know all of the places these things have to show up. So yeah, those icons may have been amazing on the upgrade.
Designing for screenshot is something that we're suffering from.
Yeah.
People have to look at the thing holistically and have the right context. Like the redesign that we're working on is mainly driven by the app developer, and so while even like what we're doing is killing the work of Lapo and me in the past 18 years, and if I look side by side by the old style and something that we're trying to figure out now, it's horrible. It makes me cry because but the thing is, that is artwork, and the new stuff is a framework, visual framework for app developers to be able to produce their app icons in a reasonable manner.
Yeah, so you got to scale it. Yeah.
Isn't that kind of the nature of it though? Like when you have a outward-facing product, it's going to have to adapt as just the market design choices change.
Oh, exactly.
You have to kill the things you love best because they're not relevant.
Yeah. There is definitely the sort of, we're the dinosaurs, still sticking to something that's already outdated. So definitely that is part of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think as well the important thing to know is that, and I always bring this up when I talk about design, is that it's not just like a dynamic system where like you have to see it moving and understand the relationships with the rest of the system. It's also symbiosis with the computer itself. And a lot of it depends on the technology you're actually looking at, and how many pixels are they? What kind of color reproduction do you actually get out of this screen? Right? It's like the palette that you're choosing, and that individual blue may not even be possible to show up on a. I was talking to one of my. It's the absolute curse of Photoshop or GIMP-based design is you use a color palette that works perfectly here. And then you go to an actual user's computer who's maybe using a 5-year-old computer that has been donated to them by and has been given to them by a charity or something like that, and they have a screen that maybe displays 5 colors.
I think there's a technical solution to keep you in check for that.
Yeah.
Just buy a second monitor a while after you bought the first one, and then you just move the window from one monitor to the other one.
It's a particular problem with designers because often they have really, really nice screens, right? Because it is important to know exactly what that colour you're looking at is what it is supposed to be, because that's even worse, right? When you designed it and you thought it was great, and then you went out and that's just a technical fail. but this is one of those things where, again, that critique could be not what you expected because you gave it, like, you have to kind of be big-hearted enough to appreciate that the system that someone else is looking at, they might literally be seeing something entirely different. And not just for the obvious reasons that, 10% of our users, maybe 15% of our users in reality, don't see certain colours. That many of us do see. At least 2 of you in this room don't see any red or green the same way.
But to go back to the critique part, I do agree that, for example, the graphic design side of things is definitely more subjective.
Yeah.
And I've been faced with the critique of GNOME being horrible to look at, and for the longest time. And most of the things, when I investigated and actually asked people, it was the gray or beige folder that made the whole thing terrible for people.
Nautilus is the most used app.
Nautilus is the most used app, absolutely. It makes a big difference, honestly. And again, it depends on what you're seeing. Again, we might have designed the world's best JPEG icon, but in reality, the user is going to see the photographs they took. So you have to be aware that you're not in a fully contained environment. But that's a really good point. Like, we get a lot of feedback about the look of GNOME generally, and about, I would say, 50% of people say that it looks amazing, like really, really amazing, and about 25% of people really, really hate it, and about 25% of people just hate it a little bit. And often that's great, like creating a polarizing product, actually, like kind of open source projects do want to be a little bit more aggressive like that and create, maybe not create haters to the same extent we might have created in the past, but to create super fans, right? You want to create enough passionate people that they want to work on it themselves, that they see that, they see themselves represented in it, and that they feel ownership and love of this. They donate, they give. We want to involve people and get more creators making more play. But I mean that's the other kind of the real point is if people can't actually use the stuff. I mean, to go back to what you were saying there, is like the real critique, and the real critique that hurts is, to me, is that no one can use the stuff that you're making. Right? So building a system or something that actually lets people create awesomeness makes a little bit worthwhile, doesn't it?
I guess my point was that even though graphic stuff has its subjective side of reviews, it also has a very objective procedure to review stuff.
Yes. Well, I have another anecdote for that.
Bring it.
Bring it to the mic.
Yeah,
I have another anecdote about positive feedback. The worst kind of positive feedback that I ever gotten was, "Oh, your icons are so..." It's way back when I was really into theming, and I created a lot of different looks for the desktop, and I got a fan mail really praising my work with a screenshot attached with all the styles mixed in. So it just created this horrible mess. So you can get positive feedback that just ruins your day as well.
Yeah.
Yes. The question about critique. We talked about getting critique from the layman, just like your general user. What about critiques from other experts that might not be very positive?
So traditionally speaking, if you work in a design agency, you get very what we might refer to as robust critique. This is probably bordering on harassment and causes lots and lots of people to leave the industry. That's pretty terrible. And many organisations don't do it that way anymore. And I'm proud to say that most of the ones that I've worked at in the past didn't. But it definitely exists. And it can be much worse than the kind of critique that you get there. But generally speaking, you have a kind of structured process of critique. Normally, kind of weekly meetings, and that's up to up to the person here as to how much they wish to break you down, or spend the time obsessing over individual things. But like normally, what you're looking at is you start off everything with a brief, right? You know what you're trying to get to. So a lot of the time, it's how well have you realised that brief? I think that's the important thing that actually makes this thing more objective, right? Is how well have you realised what you're trying to do, and then you can also apply some kind of basic standards, like is it contrasty enough, right? Some of these things you can work out programmatically. Designers should be more programmatic about the way they do some of these things. Some of these things you just have to you kind of have to feel a little bit, but it can be really hard. And the hard part about it can often be that these kind of work-ons are not specific enough. I think that's the really tough thing is trying to identify something which is when you're critiquing something from someone that is specific enough to be helpful, but not so specific that it's like just move that pixel to the left, just move that pixel to the right, move it to the left 3, right? Like when you are making changes and iterating, it's really important to like overcorrect these things, even if it makes the iteration process last a bit longer. Don't just change something. Like this is as true for anything else. Like if you're changing an animation or working on spacing or something, change it by 50%, change it by 150%, and then go, was that right or was that not? Otherwise you spend basically forever just micromanaging your way to do it. And humans don't have enough cycle. They can't see enough difference, and you'll just give up eventually. And that actually is the real thing that you worry about, is basically making people bored, which obviously I'm very worried about now, because it seems that we have actually spoken for about 35 minutes on this stuff. And they just go, yeah, sure, right? And you haven't actually reached that goal that you want to do. You haven't made the quality thing that you aim for. So you need some shortcuts to try and get there quickly. I don't know. What do you reckon? You've got 5 minutes of stuff to say.
Nothing.
I have one more question.
Yeah. Oh, please do.
Okay, this one is a slightly different direction. How do you deal with this idea of like, what do you actually owe your end user? They're not paying for it, and you're a volunteer. So I mean, one philosophy is screw you. I'm making this for me, and I'm letting you have it.
Yeah.
You should be grateful.
I mean,
and then the other one is like, do you have to give them what they want at all? Do you just say, you're going to screw up?
I prefer to try and think to not personify like individuals. I think if you're it's a bit counterintuitive, but like if you never make something for just one person, right? Try and genericize that problem to a class. Even yourself, right? Yeah. So, and also part of it is like, what's your motivation? Right? I'm massively egotistical, and I want to make software that changes the world. Not necessarily for the better, just changes it. So you kind of do need a lot of users to do that kind of thing. So you're trying to think about what interests this person represents. It's only a 7 marks analysis, but is this the kind of thing that there are hundreds of millions of mid-30s single mums who would like to use a computer, and this is actually kind of putting off trying this stuff here, right? Is this something that is not getting in their life or being helpful for them? But yeah, if you're trying to me, if it gets all very individual, then I get a bit vindictive about it. And I don't think it's very helpful for the conversation. If you try to make it a bit more abstract and a little bit less personal, then I think people as well can take that out of themselves, and they can understand that they themselves are, maybe partially representing that kind of user, but not fully, that there are other people out there. But I don't know, there are different tactics.
Yeah, for me, it's different when we talk about graphic design, which to me is very personal. So I'm always trying to make something that I myself find pleasing to look at. And interaction design. So I always try to step out of our community and try to think of the usually like I emphasize with my parents my dad was running Linux for ages, and it was just painful to see him work it. And now my kids are using, my daughter is using Linux on her workstation. So I always, picture them using the product, because the interaction that when you're targeting an enthusiast engineer and somebody like my daughter is very different.
But it can be equally valid to target an enthusiast engineer. My good friends over at System 76, they really engineers are people too, right? It's
like, how do you deal with people that actually genuinely want bad-looking desktop environments? Like, they genuinely want no icons, just text. I agree.
If you look, I don't think it's Firefox does that anymore, but they used to have this theming site where people would do vote for the design. And the top 10 skins for Firefox were just this nightmare of a gallery. So something popular doesn't mean anything for graphic design.
Yeah. I mean, it depends what you're after. Right? It's some people are willing to trade off a little bit of usability for a lot of customization, features, something that most people don't really do. So I'm glad that there are products out there that do that. But if you're striving for the kind of mass market that we're striving for, then a bit less. But I still have a pink UI. Flowers. These have been some really helpful questions, by the way, folks. Thank you so much. It's been a really interesting chat. I believe that we've run out of time. I've been told to finish up. Thank you so much for turning up.
Thank you for allowing me to impersonate Hilke.
Yeah, Hilke, I'm going to make Hilke watch the video. You're missing out, that's what I'm saying. Thank you.
When can you get the new icon?
When it's ready.
when I can convince Lapo to give a stab at it again, because he got really mad for me leaking the stuff.
Okay, yeah, so that's the other point of this. You have to just calm, walk away, think carefully, find people you love, hug them. Find some friends you trust, and you rant at them.